Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Friday night's spooky sessions in the Haven. Now, if you're not already spooked out by the look of me in a long black wig, then I don't think you're going to be ever scared of anything ever again. All joking apart, guys, welcome to the second of our Friday night spooky sessions, and I really do hope that you enjoy the stories that I have for you tonight. I'd like to welcome one and welcome all. I hope you enjoy yourselves. Have fun and stay spooky. And I'll begin with our fictional story first, and I hope you enjoy it. My life has been somewhat ruined by an experience I had when I was younger. I think so often back to the time my experience happened. Nobody ever believed my story at the time, so I decided to write it for now, for the world to see. It really began when I was 14 or so, when my family moved homes. My dad had just been offered a job with better pay, and a week later we'd sold our house and rented an apartment in our new town. We moved during the summer, so it was simple starting at my new school. And when the term began, I nervously walked from our apartment building to the school, which was rather close. I hadn't the chance to meet any local kids, so I knew nobody and was scared of having to make new friends all by myself and being all alone. I don't recall really speaking to anyone that morning. I was just too shy. I took my timetable in a slightly trembling hand and looked to see what my first class was. Maths, in room 104. I checked the little school map handout I'd been given. I looked at that map over and over, and I just couldn't see a class with that number at all. By then there were no staff around, and I began to panic. Where the hell do I go? Well, I noticed on the layout of the building that there was a whole section to the right of the school that seemed to have plenty of classroom-sized rooms, but no numbers. The class numbers were on the far left of the school, were numbers 300 to 310. The centre of the building had rooms designated in the 200 to 230 range. I decided my classroom 104 would logically be to the right. I walked down long corridors, and most of the other students weren't new, so they'd already made it to their classes, while I contemplated my map. And because of this, the corridors were now deserted. In retrospect, I should have just found the help desk and asked them to give me directions. But I was so shy, I thought, I'll try and do this on my own. Anyways, I followed the building layout, and at the end of an eerily quiet and long corridor, my passage was blocked by a rather old-looking wooden double doors that just didn't open when I pushed. This seemed wrong. Like, this part of the building wasn't meant to be entered. That made no sense to me. I played with the idea that someone had actually shut them, or maybe I just wasn't pushing hard enough. I rammed into the doors with my shoulder, and with a scraping sound of metal on wood, they opened. I realised then I'd broken the bolts on the other side of the door, which were brittle with rust. Horrified at having broken a door lock on my first day. Well, I was just about to turn and run from the scene and just ask someone to help me find my class. I obviously shouldn't be in this part of the school. The new corridor was old and dusty. The lockers were all hanging open and unused, and a faint smell of mould hung in the air. And as I turned, I noticed the numbers painted on the glass windows of the doors along the corridor. The one nearest to me read 100. Perplexed, I checked my timetable again to assure myself that I'd read my class number correctly. It was clear. My room was 104. 104. And just along this corridor, apparently. Well, I began to walk slowly, looking into the windows of each class that I passed. 100, empty. 102, empty, except for a plastic skeleton hanging in the corner by a pile of yellowing student lab coats. Still, it was enough to make me flinch. As I checked 103, empty, I heard the voice of an adult man coming from the room opposite. Room 104. I peeked through the window. Full. Except it wasn't what I expected to see. Sure, there was a teacher wearing a worn brown suit and blue bow tie, and there were students, all focused on this teacher, sitting apart from one another in old-fashioned wooden tables. What made me pause was what they were wearing. Kids didn't dress like that anymore. It looked like a classroom from an old film or show. The teacher stood beside a blackboard, dusty with chalk. Despite this oddity, I knocked on the door. I assumed the school had a poor budget. The teacher didn't notice my knocking, so I quietly opened the door and walked in. None of the students took their gaze away from the teacher, who also didn't pay any attention to me. Well, I awkwardly apologised for my lateness, citing that I'd gotten lost. I then made my way over to the only free seat in the room and sat down. I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment. I must have interrupted the class, I thought. The teacher began the lesson a few seconds later, rather casually. His name was Mr. Talori. He began to chalk equations on the board and got the class to solve them. The lesson was rather ordinary, except for the fact that no calculators were used. Whenever I raised my hand to answer a question, almost to try and win back favour from the teacher, he ignored it and always chose another student to answer the problem. The lesson ended abruptly after what felt like hours. And by the end of it, I was bored and miserable. I just wanted to get home and complain about the way I'd been ignored. And when I left the room, I felt pangs of hunger. I glanced at my watch and I was shocked to see the school day had ended. A whole day of maths. I was absolutely horrified. I just decided I hated this school. It's just something wasn't right. I just hated this school. I walked slowly home, going over the day's events in my mind. It was all really very weird. But I suppose I'd get used to this new school eventually. I doubted it, but I knew I'd get used to it. Well, when I got home, my mother was talking on the home phone. Her face displayed absolute confusion. She heard me come in and frowned when she saw me. She looked somewhat angry and asked whoever was on the other end of the phone to hold, please. And then she accused me of skipping school. Confusion just followed. I told her I was in class all day, but apparently the school had phoned to say I wasn't in any lessons and they hadn't even seen me after I collected my timetable. I said I was in Mr. Talori's class in room 104. 104? All day. you know, I must just have missed the register. And that's, I thought, well, I'm late. So I've missed the register. They haven't registered me in the class. So that's what's happened. But I've been in Mr. Talori's class all day. I promise you, that's where I've been. My mum paused and told the school on the phone my story. Her expression just froze after a few seconds, and then she looked at me rather worriedly. She hung up the phone and told me what the school had said. Mr. Talori hadn't worked for the school in 38 years. Apparently, room 104 was part of an abandoned section of the school that hadn't been used since a school shooting nearly 40 years before. The school thought I was playing some kind of sick joke. Well, that night I went on the web to find out if what the school said was true. Quickly I found an old newspaper article about the school massacre that had been archived. A madman had simply walked into the school with a hunting rifle and shot a whole class dead. He'd blocked a doorway and shot everyone in the maths classroom. An old grainy photo showed the class where the murders happened. I recognised it immediately. It was room 104. An obituary showed tributes to the dead and photos of all that had died. I recognised them too. Mr. Talori and all the students I'd spent the day with. My heart felt like it had stopped. I felt sick. I felt cold to my bones at that moment. And after that day, I changed schools. Now, years later, I've written all this down. My account of what happened to me, which nobody has ever believed. The reason why now? Well, yesterday I received a letter in the post. There was no address. It just simply happened to appear through my letterbox. It was a class reunion invite signed by my old teacher, Mr. Talori. Now, that was your piece of fiction. What do you think of that? Was it spooky enough? Or could I have tried harder? Let me know what you thought of it down in the comments, because I'm really excited to hear what you thought of it and the twist in the tale, because I'm sure a lot the way through you must have thought, oh, we know how this is going to end. But it didn't, because look at the twist in the tale. Many years later, to be contacted by the ghost of your old teacher. Who would have thought? Not me. So I'm looking forward to chatting with you about this in the comments, because I have so many thoughts and I want to tell you why I chose it. Now, I'd like to read to you a true account of a ghost story. Now, this story I found it was happened in Singapore, and it happened quite a few years ago. I think roughly in the 90s. But there's been apparently in the last 6 years there's been an increase in activity with regard to this particular story. So I'd like to read this to you now. and it's about this tragedy that happened in a place called Bedok in Singapore. So it goes as follows. Some blocks of the HDB flats had to be abandoned for years because of this case. There are spirits wandering high in the air. In Singapore, Bedok, North Avenue 4, Block 99, there used to be a famous suicide case where a mother threw her sleeping 3-year-old child from the 25th floor, after which she fell to her death. The police classified the case as suicide, and no foul play was suspected. The family did have problems, financial as well as extramarital affairs. The husband owned loan sharks, well, a substantial amount of money, and he was seeing another woman and he wanted a divorce. Well, the wife refused and they both quarrelled frequently, thus leading to the family breaking up. What's eerie was that at her death, she was wearing a bright red dress. It was her wedding gown. She left behind no suicide note, but she did write something on the wall in the living room. And it's something apparently that would send shivers down the spine of any living being. It said, she wrote, "It's not over, darling." And though the lady in red never returned, someone else did. Well, the husband wanted to sell the house, but he couldn't find a buyer. So later on, his mistress moved in, the one he'd been having the affair with, and they got married. And after a few years, they had a son. Well, when the son was 3 years old, something spooky took place. The boy was taking a nap in the afternoon, and suddenly he started talking and laughing in his room. The maid went in to check, and to her horror, she found the boy smiling, eyes transfixed on the wall, and he said, "Caw caw," which in Chinese means brother. The maid related the events to the parents that very night, but they brushed it aside and said that he was probably just fooling around. Well, that same night, the son cried very, very loudly, ran to his father and said that Caw caw bullied him. The father scolded him and told him not to make stories up, and the little boy just refused to sleep in his room. And, the father thought, right, for the sake of peace, I'll let him sleep in our room with us. And in that night, it was about 2, 3 in the morning, loud banging from cupboards, loud cries of a child could be heard coming from the little boy's room. So the thing was, the crying was very, very familiar to the father, because to him it sounded exactly like the son who had passed away. So petrified, the father told his son to stay away from the room and kept him in his bed while he and his new wife went to check on the commotion. And when they entered the little boy's room, there was nothing to be found. And then, they just heaved a sigh of relief, thought, no, there's nothing in here. And they turned to go out, and then the maid went past them and she started screeching. So the husband and wife run back into the room to find their son, their 3-year-old little boy, standing on the edge of the window. And apparently the grills of the window had been pried open. But there he was laughing and smiling. He was waving goodbye to them because his brother, Caw caw, was Superman, and he was going to take his little brother flying in the night. So he told, according to the little boy, say bye-bye to Mummy and Daddy, we're going flying in the night. And he blew his mummy a kiss, and then he jumped. Well, the mother and the father were just screaming. The mother fainted. And the father went down, saw his son, called for an ambulance, called for the police. And the police swarmed the place in the morning to investigate. And they went back into the house and saw written on the parents' bedroom room wall, 4 chilling words. And it said, "This is for Mummy." And it was written in a child's hand. The police have classified this case as unnatural death, with no foul play suspected. Well, till today, that particular unit is still vacant. It can't be sold. There's, as the neighbours go around telling potential buyers all about the history of the house. So obviously, devastated parents can't sell it, they can't move away. So they've just had to leave it vacant and unsold and find themselves somewhere else to live. Rumour is that the night that the second little boy jumped, it was his 3rd birthday. And it was also, as it would happen, the 3rd birthday of the first little boy whose mother had thrown him from the window. So apparently many neighbours are still saying to this day that there are strange sounds of a woman crying in the night. There are sounds of little children laughing, running around, and quite a few years have passed, but the last 6 years the activity's increased. But like they say, to this day, many people still hear the laughter of these children and the woman crying in the middle of the night. And that's your factual story. So, what do we think of that? Now, obviously, I don't know how people in Singapore or Chinese people in general deal with ghost stories. It's not something that I'm particularly, familiar with myself. I don't know how they, I don't even know if they go ghost hunting. I mean, I'm sure they must tell ghost stories. They must do, because obviously neighbours go around telling everybody about hearing noises and hearing laughter and hearing crying and, telling everybody, oh, you can't go near that house because it's obviously haunted. So they obviously must do something, but I'm just wondering how it may differ from how we do things here in the West. Do I believe this story? Obviously, I haven't been able to verify any of it because, it would have been on Singapore TV, and I'm not Hercule Poirot or, Miss Marple, so I wouldn't be able to tell you, how to get onto, Singapore TV or, their archive and find out whether there's any truth to any of this. But does it sound plausible? Yes, because, unfortunately, when people are driven to, the very length of the rope that they can take, they will do, terrible things. So we know that's possible. And obviously the woman was perfectly capable of doing it. I must admit, me, just personally as a mum, I could never understand anyone, wanting to do that, to put a child through that. I don't really get that. But do I believe in the story? It's plausible. I'm not saying I don't believe it. I'm just saying that, I'm not sure how much of that is fact, but wrapped up in, rumours, because we know what happens with rumours. And I'm not trying to, you know, you know, play a pun here, but we know what Chinese whispers are like. And you start off saying one thing, and then by the end of the line, it's a completely different story. So I'm looking forward to seeing what you've got to say in the comments. And, I'm really looking forward to getting a discussion going. And I hope that you all enjoyed that one. And I'm also really looking forward to what you've got to say about the first one, which was called The Class. And I must admit, I did enjoy that one. I did spend a lot of time this week, looking at different stories, and half of them would be really good stories, and then you'd find out they were very short stories. Now, unless one night we dedicate a night to purely fiction, but all short stories, that's something that we can talk about if it's something that you'd like us to do. I'm more than happy to do that for you. I can easily find a good half a dozen short stories that I think will keep you pretty, enthralled. Anyway, as Rich Lux would say, I wonder how you feel about my makeup look. I was talking to one of our regulars called Gold Dust Woman, and she was telling me that she likes to have fun with wigs. And you know me, I like to have fun with wigs. I think I really do think that I need a fringe, but this is actually, it's a wig that I picked up from eBay, and it was cheap and cheerful, and it's jet black. And I thought, well, if I'm going to be spooky, I'm going to try and be as spooky as I possibly can. I'm certainly no Morticia Adams. I'm more like Pugsley Adams, but, that's just me. Or with a touch of Lurch thrown in, If anybody do you remember the Addams Family? The original one with Lurch? I used to really thoroughly enjoy that show when I was a child. I loved it, and love it even more when I was an adult. Pity it's not on TV anymore. Anyway, I think we've roughly had our 30 minutes. I think we have. I'm sure I started at about 5 past midnight here. So it's coming up time for us to end our sessions, our particular tonight's session rather. I'm very conscious of the time because, I did put up the poll and I did ask you what sort of was the best time for you. And I know that some of you wanted it just for 20 minutes. But, the majority, outvoted you, I'm afraid. But, you've got, well, it's still within 30 minutes. So you've got it starting with a 2. I don't know if you want to try and work out that logic. But anyway, I hope you've enjoyed our second Friday night spooky session. I look forward to hearing what you've got to say, and I just will see you again next Friday night, and I hope you will join me once more in our haven for a Friday night spooky session. Good night. I love you all.